The most dangerous moments in history are not when leaders shout, they are when they pause. When Donald Trump says if they start killing people, we will get involved, the world hears restraint. But restraint is not peace, it is calculation. Behind the softer tone, military assets move, plans are dusted off, warnings are issued without being announced, because everyone in power understands one thing: credibility is a currency. Spend it too freely, and you start wars you can't finish. Refuse to spend it at all, and threats stop working. Iran is watching, the Ayatollah is watching, and so are America's allies and its enemies. This moment is not about bombs. It is about whether restraint looks like wisdom or weakness. If you want to understand how power really works, not in slogans but in consequences, stay with me. Because what looks like calm may only be the quiet before miscalculation. And once that happens, history does not rewind. Now let's step back. To understand why this pause matters, we need to define the real problem underneath it. This is not a story about whether America can strike Iran. That question is easy. The real question is whether striking would actually change anything. Inside Washington, no one is debating firepower. They are debating outcomes. Would an attack fracture the regime, or would it harden it? Because what the protests revealed was not weakness alone. They revealed durability. The Iranian security apparatus held the demonstrations did not break the system. And that matters. History shows that when authoritarian regimes survive their most violent moments, they often emerge more ruthless, not less. This is why advisors warned the president, collapse is not guaranteed. More force does not equal more control. In fact, it often pulls you deeper into conflicts you never planned to own. This is the dilemma beneath the headlines. Support change without owning the chaos. Apply pressure without triggering nationalism. Project strength without destroying credibility. To understand why this balance is so fragile, we need to look backward at what happens when red lines are drawn and not enforced. Every administration carries ghosts. For this one, they are 2009 and 2013. In Iran, the Green Movement rose and fell. The United States watched. In Syria, a red line was drawn and then erased. Chemical weapons crossed it. Nothing followed. Those moments taught regimes a lesson. Wait long enough and threats dissolve. That memory hangs over today's crisis. Because when protests erupt again and violence escalates, leaders ask a brutal question: if we encourage people to rise, what happens when we don't follow through? This is the cycle of credibility. Encouragement creates expectation, expectation creates responsibility, and responsibility, if unmet, turns into regret. The current restraint is shaped by that history, not out of hesitation, but caution learned the hard way. Military action once promised clean endings. Iraq proved otherwise. Afghanistan confirmed it. Authoritarian systems rarely collapse from outside pressure alone. They erode from within, slowly, violently, unpredictably. That is the backdrop to this pause, and it sets the stage for the first real test of miscalculation. Because history never repeats quietly, the first shock did not come from missiles. It came from restraint. When protests exploded, many expected escalation. Instead, the system absorbed the pressure. The Iranian regime did not fracture. It tightened. Security forces held their ground. Violence increased. And the world hesitated. This was not retreat. It was restraint born of risk. Because advisors understood something uncomfortable. Using force now might have saved face but cost strategy. An external strike would not guarantee collapse. It might do the opposite. Rally the population, unify elites, turn internal dissent into external defiance. This is the paradox of intervention. The moment you step in, the story changes. It stops being about protesters. It becomes about sovereignty. And once that happens, Even a fragile regime can survive far longer than anyone expects. If you're trying to understand why power so often hesitates right before it acts, this is why. Because the wrong move does not just fail, it entrenches the problem. But restraint creates its own danger, because when threats are made and not enforced, another kind of signal is sent, and that signal does not go unnoticed. Which brings us to what's really happening beneath the surface. What you are seeing is not indecision, it is leverage being assembled. Power does not always move first with violence. Sometimes it moves assets, positions forces, creates ambiguity. The build-up matters because it keeps every option alive. Military action is not the goal. It is the pressure point. The real mechanism is credibility management. Appear too eager and you corner yourself. Appear too hesitant and you invite testing. This is where the so-called madman theory comes in. Not irrationality, unpredictability. The belief that restraint today does not guarantee restraint tomorrow. That miscalculation will be punished even if patience has been shown before. This is why taunts matter. This is why signals are watched obsessively. Because authoritarian regimes survive by reading weakness, and democracies survive by managing escalation. Behind the scenes, pressure does not stop. It simply changes form. Quiet support, information flows, invisible interference. Enough to weaken, not enough to unify the enemy. This is the hidden machinery of modern power. Slow, calculated, relentless. But mechanisms create momentum, and momentum eventually demands a test, which is why the second crisis is already taking shape. The second crisis does not announce itself. It builds quietly, through words, through taunts, through misread signals. When the Ayatollah continues to provoke, it is not rhetoric. It is testing. Testing whether restraint is permanent or conditional. Because if there is one thing history teaches authoritarian leaders, it is this: today's pause may be tomorrow's paralysis. And that assumption can be fatal for both sides. Military options remain on the table precisely because they are not used. Assets move closer. Rhetoric tightens. Allies watch for resolve. Enemies watch for hesitation. This is the dangerous zone of escalation without action, where a single misstep, a strike, a death, a misinterpreted signal forces a decision that no one wanted to make yet. The tragedy of power is that patience can look identical to weakness until it suddenly doesn't. And when that moment arrives, leaders are judged not by what they intended, but by what they allowed. This is why the next phase will not be decided in public speeches. It will be decided by how ordinary people experience the pressure, because that is where power ultimately breaks or survives. If you are watching this from the outside, it can all feel abstract. Strategy, leverage, credibility. But if you are inside Iran, none of this is theoretical. For you, pressure is not a concept. It is daily life. When the internet goes dark, your voice disappears. When security forces escalate, fear becomes routine. And when foreign powers debate restraint, you are the one living with the consequences of delay. This is the hardest truth of geopolitics. Great powers move slowly, but ordinary people pay immediately. You are told to be patient. You are encouraged to hope. But hope without protection is fragile. This is why outside military action so often fails to help the very people it claims to support, because bombs do not distinguish between regimes and societies. And when violence comes from abroad, even justified anger can be redirected inward. If you care about what happens next, not as a spectator but as a citizen of a connected world, this is the moment to pay attention. Because what leaders decide here will shape not just borders but lives. And the impact does not stop at one country's edge. It never does. What happens in Iran never stays in Iran, because this crisis is plugged into a much larger system. Allies measure American resolve. Adversaries look for patterns. When restraint is shown here, it is read in Moscow, It is studied in Beijing. If pressure works without force, it becomes a model. If threats fade without consequence, it becomes permission. This is why debates about Greenland, about NATO, about tariffs and leverage are not distractions. They are connected signals. Power today is not just about where troops go. It is about whether rules still matter, whether alliances are durable, When allies panic, credibility erodes. When credibility erodes, order weakens. And when order weakens, revisionist powers move, not because they want chaos, but because chaos creates opportunity. This is the danger of precedent. One misread restraint can echo across continents, and once that echo becomes policy elsewhere, it is almost impossible to call it back, which leaves us with the hardest question of all: where does this road actually lead? There are only a few realistic futures, and none of them are simple. There are three paths forward. None are clean. The first is managed erosion. Pressure continues quietly, the regime weakens slowly, internal fractures grow without foreign fingerprints. This is the longest road and the least dramatic, but it avoids the rally around the flag effect that has saved regimes before. The second path is miscalculation. A provocation goes too far. A response comes too fast. Escalation happens, not by design but by momentum. This is how wars start, even when no one wants one. The third path is overreach. Forces applied to restore credibility. But credibility gained through coercion often comes at the cost of legitimacy. History is clear here. You can break a system from the outside. You cannot rebuild it the same way. What determines which future emerges is not ideology, it is perception. How restraint is interpreted, how threats are weighed, how patience is mistaken for permission. This is why moments like this matter more than declarations. Because systems do not collapse in headlines. They collapse when enough actors decide the rules no longer bind. And once that belief takes hold, the final act arrives quickly, which brings us to the real lesson behind all of this. Power rarely fails all at once. It erodes quietly through moments that seem small until they connect. This pause between threat and action is one of those moments, not because of what Donald Trump will do, but because of what others believe he might do. Deterrence lives in that uncertainty. Lose it, and chaos accelerates. Overuse it, and legitimacy collapses. The hardest job of leadership is not choosing force or peace. It is choosing timing. Because once action is taken, there is no rewind, no clean exit, no guaranteed outcome. If there is one insight to take from this, it is this: restraint is not weakness, but it is only strength if it is believed. The future of Iran, the stability of alliances, and the credibility of global order hinge on that belief. If you want to understand how today's quiet decisions shape tomorrow's conflicts, stay with this channel. Subscribe, share this conversation, because the next crisis will not announce itself either. And when it does, what was decided here will already be part of the story.